If you're not interested in making your own choices, you can ask your partner or your friends or your parents to make choices for you. But you should not ask that everyone should be limited to that lowest base of choice.
Yes.
Yeah? I don't know. I have it sometimes when I go with a friend to a restaurant and they say, PS order for me. I'm like, fine, I'm good at ordering. That's okay.
Yeah.
But I don't want the government to order for all of us because then it's going to be like, I don't know, potato soup every day.
We're here at the Centre for Independent Studies. I'm here with Fred Roeder, who is Managing Director of the Consumer Choice Centre. Most consumer organisations are in favour of more regulation to protect consumers for this and that. Fred's Consumer Choice Centre is in favour of more deregulation. Now, Fred, can I ask you, what's your basic argument for why existing consumer advocacy groups, often you might say tend to be on the progressive left side of politics, why they're not necessarily serving the interests of consumers and you should take a more pro-market approach to it?
Thank you for having me here. Unfortunately, most countries of the world, the classical legacy consumer group operates under the notion that consumers are too stupid to make choices on their own, which I think is very insulting. You know, we're all consumers and I think actually we can make our own choices. And as a consumer, I'm interested in safe products that are affordable and that I have choice, that I don't just have one car to choose from or one soda to choose from, but actually I have choice and I can go after my preferences. And maybe sometimes I make some mistakes, but then I realize this brand was not the right brand for me or the quality was not good and I should change my consumer behavior. But I want to have that choice and I want to see competition in the marketplace so prices go down. And I and many others felt that there is an underrepresentation in the political field and in consumer interest representation of consumers that like choice, innovation, competition, and prices actually going down.
So a classic example, which I think really put you on this road, was in 2014 in Berlin with the introduction of rideshare services to challenge the monopoly, if you like, of the taxi industry. How does that fit into your framework and how traditional consumer choice advocates would have seen things?
So obviously, I was happy when there was competition in the rideshare and taxi market. As someone who often had to go to the airport, I was happy to get a clean, safe car that automatically charges my credit card, and I get an email receipt at the end of the trip. That makes a lot of things easier. Naturally, the taxi monopoly lobby was against that. That makes sense.
It's a producer organization, really.
Yes, it makes sense that they want to protect their market. Well, that's very rational. But what surprised me is that the traditional consumer rights groups were not speaking up for consumers like me who benefited massively from this improvement of urban transport and ride shares. And then the taxi lobby went on strike and protested European-wide against this competition. And I organized a little counter-protest to show that there are actually consumers who want to have this choice. And that went a bit viral. So I saw that there is definitely an interest and appetite for the entire political debate to have consumers to talk on their own behalf that they like something and shouldn't get banned.
Yes.
But the traditional consumer groups were more like, oh, there are no long-term studies yet if ride-sharing is safe. You know, this is a bit when the automobile got introduced and people said, oh, there are no long-term studies if driving 20 kilometers an hour might not damage your brain.
Yes.
Right? And this is like very driven by the precautionary principle, but also by this notion that consumers are too stupid to choose for themselves. And if I'm being asked, do you want to have something cheaper that's safer and more convenient? I actually say yes.
Yes. And so clearly this is an example where the industry sort of self-regulates itself because with, say, the Uber example, it's all about, you putting in, how many stars for it and bad producers tend to get weeded out, just as I suppose bad consumers might as well. If you've got an abusive consumer, they get sort of rated as well. But right. Is that an example where it self-regulates itself?
So the invention of the platform economy,
yes.
Be it Uber, be it Airbnb or marketplaces such as Amazon or eBay have, I think, really created competition to the traditional consumer rights movement, where you needed to have a government body to assess what's better and what's safer. whereas now there's immediate feedback, right? Like if you have an abusive driver, the driver gets deplatformed. If you have a bad customer who's a rowdy in the car, you might get banned or you get a low rating. So that is consumer protection in real time. And it's very agile. It has improved so many sectors of our economy, from, buying something online and you see it's actually not a good product or it's actually faulty. Usually get your refund very quickly from Amazon, and they pick the product up from you and bring you a new one, right? You don't even have to leave your house for it, and you're not charged extra for it. It's great. To clothing businesses that ship e-commerce, clothing companies that ship you things just to try out. You can send the shoes back if you don't like them. It's fantastic. It saves so much of our time.
Yes.
You used to have to dedicate your entire Saturday to run errands.
Yes.
And now this can happen like between courses of your lunch while you sit at home and spend time with your family and friends, that these products just come and you can choose from them.
And I suppose in the taxi industry example, like personally as a consumer, I imagine this is for many consumers, I just feel that the Uber or the ride share, I'm going to get a more, I can understand what the product's going to be. Taxis are more hit and miss. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. And so, you get that self-policing of the service, and I feel more confident as a consumer, which might have been, and that was really an illegal product to begin with.
Yes. I mean, just look at international travels. If you 15 years ago, when you travel to another country, you were really worried that you get ripped off by the taxi driver. Tourists are easy bait because you don't really know what the meter will spit out and what the actual price is.
They know you're a tourist.
And they know you're a tourist.
Yeah.
They drive 10 times around the block before dropping you off to rack up the meter. And now you can basically travel to almost any country in the world. You arrive at the airport, you open your app, your card details are already in there, and there is a specific fare, and they bring you to your hotel.
Yes.
It is fantastic. And you don't need to speak the language. I mean, the consumer experience of international travels has improved so much thanks to ride sharing.
Yes.
And I think it's a story that's not often enough told. And also the safety, right? If you're at night in a car, or you're a young woman in a car, but you're actually being tracked by the app, that's a good thing.
Yes.
So in terms of kidnapping, abuse, all of these things.
Yes.
It also has brought prices down, which in many countries you see studies that shows driving under influence rates have actually reduced thanks to ride sharing, because they're often more competitive than taxis. Cheaper, it's more often available. So people actually take the Uber back home.
And in terms of another example where the consumer advocates end up advocating against consumer interests, I suppose regulation of housing, the rental markets, might be another classic example of that, like say the taxi industry.
Yeah, unfortunately, in many large cities of the world and many countries, housing has become like a luxury. And while previous generations were able to make a down payment for their house after saving for 2 years in their first job, I have a Canadian friend who always says his parents bought their first house for 2 raspberries. And now you would have to pay $2 million for the same. That is a classic problem of artificially low supply, where there are too many restrictions on creating more density in urban areas, building higher, allowing more permits to build more, because as humans, we've been building houses for thousands of years. Right? But they are like artificial restrictions now in terms of supply of housing stock, which leaves especially young consumers in a very precarious situation. It takes you decades to save enough to make a down payment for a house. You rent. Usually as a tenant, you don't have the same rights of modifying the house you live in. You don't have the safety if you still can live there in a few years. And there's an easy fix for this. Yeah, it's just build more.
Yes, and I suppose you get a lot of pro-tenant bodies, advocates, might call for rent controls. For example, it sounds like it might make sense. Let's put a cap and freeze rents in favour of tenants against, nasty landlords. What would be your...
I love the example of rent control. So when I grew up in Germany in the 90s and early 2000s, we did not have rent control in Germany. And I always heard it from friends who lived in other countries like the Netherlands, that rent control is such a bad thing because the apartments you can rent are in a terrible shape. It's really hard to find one. You need to know people to actually get an apartment. And I couldn't really understand it because I actually grew up in a fairly liberalized rental market, and renting back then in Germany was very cheap. And then I understood it more when Germany introduced rent control.
Yes.
Because then it made it much harder for people to actually find something. Because either the only way as a landlord to increase your rent is by totally refurbishing the place, investing a lot, and then you crowd out lots of younger consumers or socially vulnerable consumers. And by regulating prices, by capping prices, you basically just create scarcity, right? Because first of all, as an investor, you're not going to build a multi-apartment building if you know that rent increases are below inflation annually. Yeah, I mean, it's a bad business case. And as a landlord, you really just want to make sure to get someone that ideally pays you like a little extra. I mean, there are these stories from Berlin in Germany, which has rent control, that basically if you really want to get an apartment as a tenant, you better make some pre-cash payment informal to the landlord.
This is the black market.
It's a black market. You pay $10,000 for the kitchen equipment at the beginning or something like this.
Yes.
And if you don't, you will not get the apartment.
It's a less transparent, more under the counter type black market,
which is inefficient.
Yes. And so housing, which at Centre for Independent Studies, the researchers here have played a big role in shifting the debate to the supply side, open up the supply side so that you can produce more housing. That's the solution to the housing crisis, rather than attacking tax concessions for investors has been the sort of scene. There's too many investors in the housing market has been our thing. But housing and taxis, maybe they're the sort of easy examples in some ways. Surely it gets more difficult where you get into things which are a little bit more potentially life and death, say the health industry, pharmaceuticals. How can it be that allowing taking back regulations and safety controls away from the supply of health services and pharmaceuticals, how can that be in consumers' interests?
Safety controls are important. Wow. And I would personally never take a drug that didn't go through rigid safety testing. I wouldn't want to get on a plane without safety testing or in a car.
And you think that, and the government has a role in...
Government has a role in this.
Yes.
I just think that the government so far are set up is often very inefficient. It takes too long for drugs to actually getting approved and hit the market. It's too expensive, which also then leads to only a few pharmaceutical companies really being able to bring drugs to the market. I think, for instance, by the time Australia had approved the COVID vaccines, I already was double vaccinated with Pfizer.
And why was that?
Because your regulator took an extra 4 months to review something the FDA and the Europeans already deemed safe. So maybe the Australian regulator, the TGA, or your regulatory body is much more sophisticated than all the Americans and Europeans combined. But at the end of the day, they came to the same conclusion.
Yes.
So it just delayed the rollout of the vaccine, which probably also delayed the country being locked down and isolated.
Yes.
Which was very bad for the economy, bad for people's mental health.
Yes.
You had to spend even more on stimulus packages. So my question is, why don't we say we have regulators mutually recognizing decisions? So if among developed countries, if Japan or the US or Europe deems something safe, Australian patients should already have access to it.
Yes. What about some of the areas that are already perhaps a bit deregulated or compared to large parts of the healthcare sector, like plastic surgery? And no doubt things go wrong there. You've probably got some operators who, I wouldn't want to go or want my relatives to go and have plastic surgery, and investigative journalists on TV will come up from some horror stories. Is it too dangerous, though, shouldn't that be regulated more heavily?
Generally speaking, if you look at where prices and costs in the health system go down, there are only very few areas. It tends to be dental services, because in most markets or countries, the dentists and dental practices are more privately run, less regulated. You have eye surgeries, especially corrective eye surgeries, like LASIK or Smile, and you have plastic surgeries in terms of cosmetic, like lifestyle. I want to look better.
Yes.
Doesn't always look better, but the prices for these services keep going down. If you go usually into a dental practice, it looks very nice and fancy, and there's competition because the prices are often also less regulated. It's actually an attractive business, and you need to provide a really good service to your patients. And these three areas are basically the only areas where we have deflation in healthcare, whereas everywhere else, healthcare in all countries of the world gets more expensive, right? Because there are too many layers of regulation, there are too many middlemen. It's very hard for entrepreneurs to innovate in there, because you basically, as a player in the health system, you have to follow the money.
Yes.
Right? It's not just about offering a better experience to the patient. It's like, how do I get these government funds and these insurance funds to somehow pay for my work? Right? So you just basically follow the process that's kind of prescribed for in the system, how to get money or how to get reimbursed. And it's a standard question in healthcare for like an investor or a practice or hospital is not how can we serve the patient better, but how do we get reimbursed?
Yeah.
And that's the same in single payer health systems.
Yeah.
Right? It's basically how do we get that honeypot of money?
That the system tends to be run by the producer interests, and that by all these regulations that are imposed on delivery of health services or the insurance market tend to stifle potential innovation that is there that stops the market responding to the new needs of the population, because now we're getting older, we live with sort of diseases for longer, and we have to manage it, and the existing health systems struggle to adapt to the new environment. Would that be one of your arguments?
Yes, it's basically hard to innovate within the system, right? Like, because in most, for instance, if you're in a hospital in Australia, you need to have a DRG to get reimbursed for something, right? And if your new service is not covered by this catalog of what it's being paid for by the government or even private insurance, then you cannot monetize your product, right? And that leads to a lack of innovation. If you look, for instance, at e-commerce platforms, they can just bring in a new product, a new service, and if people buy it, success.
Yes.
Right? And healthcare, except the private out-of-pocket market, which is innovative, and you have lots of great innovations there, from health concierges to eye surgeries usually, and plastic surgeries where there's innovation happening and prices go down. Everywhere else, prices go up. Right? And that shouldn't be in our interest, because good healthcare is important, and it needs to become more affordable, and it actually should also be better. We have so many diseases we can't cure yet. There are so many treatments that should become better and easier, and we should be able to leave the hospital sooner rather than later and healthier.
Now, you mentioned before the big tech platforms that are enabling smaller producers to be connected with all sorts of smaller producers, and that's providing its own sort of self-regulation on it. Just tell us about how brand tech platforms, credit card suppliers, how these, in your experience, tend to provide its own discipline on the market and protection for consumers.
Yes. I think it's important to look at a lot of these companies as actually businesses that are there for their customers. So I love using a credit card for transactions, because I know if there's fraud, if I don't receive the good I ordered online, my credit card company will immediately reimburse me, and then they fight the battle with that business that didn't provide me with what we initially agreed on. Right? It's basically like a private dispute settlement service. And by default, consumers are always right. And then if you start pulling some shenanigans with a credit card company, they will shut you down.
Yes.
Yeah. So, there's a very good data-driven way of fighting for your rights. And I had it often with credit card companies that an airline didn't want to refund me during COVID times, all these flights that I booked and never happened. The airline was like, well, we give you a voucher. I'm like, I don't want a voucher. I don't know if I want to fly with you in 2 years or if you're even still in business. So I just went online, my credit card login portal.
And they've got the power to get it out of the airline.
I just clicked on money back. Within 2 seconds, the money is back.
Yes.
And then it's one of the large credit card companies fighting with a large airline.
Yep.
And the airline will lose because it's not their right to keep the money.
Yes.
But for me to go to court and fight this out will cost me a lot of money. I need to upfront the court fees till I win. That's really complicated. It's much better to have this quick resolution done by like a credit card company. You have the same with like market platforms such as Amazon, and there are others that think by default you're always right, and then they see if you complain too often or return things too often, maybe your score goes a bit down, and then they look a bit more into your case. But if you just once or twice a year complain about something on Amazon, they just refund you the money. That's like, okay, we're really sorry. And that's a great experience for me as a consumer because I don't need to fight for too long to get something back. I have the example, I bought some wine here in Sydney yesterday, and I had to prepay 9 bottles, and they only allowed bank wire. So I had to do a bank wire from the UAE to Sydney. And yesterday they delivered the wine, but 1 bottle was missing. But I already prepaid for 9 bottles, and I was not allowed to use a credit card because they didn't want to take credit cards. Now I have to fight with them to get my money back for that 1 bottle, which is really annoying. And I wish I would have used like a better platform, but yes. I think also alcohol sales here are fairly highly regulated. It's not so easy just to buy things online. Yeah. So it was fairly analog, and now I need to chase them for like 50 Australian.
But aren't these big tech companies, these big tech platforms, aren't they becoming big, powerful monopolists that can exert their own market power over other businesses and over consumers?
Do you remember MySpace?
It was top dog for a while.
Yes, for like the blink of an eye, they were monopolists, and everyone thought for the next 50 years we're going to upload weird playlists on MySpace. And now if you ask a 20-year-old what MySpace is, they don't know. The diffusion pace, the competitiveness and market entry barriers in the digital space are so low that I think we don't need to be worried about the rise of all these companies, because eventually they will also fall fairly quickly, and there's competition. For a few years we thought Facebook will be there forever, no one else. And now you have other platforms. Some parts of the world, TikTok or Snapchat.
Facebook's where your parents go, is it?
Yeah.
Not the young people. They all go on to
Instagram or so they're just or TikTok actually. They're very young people. So there's competition, and especially the marketplaces thrive because they have a consumer-first mindset. These are businesses, they allow small businesses and other businesses to operate and sell on their platform, such as also Airbnb or Uber. But it's always about ensuring the consumer has a good experience, and if not, the consumer gets their money back.
Yep.
And that just reduces transaction costs for consumers quite a bit. And if they stop making a good job, consumers will go elsewhere, right? Then a new opportunity opens up for another player.
Yep. Now, are you seen as, I think your organisation is funded by private companies. Are you seen as in the marketplace as someone who's beholden to the interests of private companies, one, and or are you seeing the debate shift a bit? And I point to, say, the abundance debate out of the US, out of the Ezra Klein and the Thompson book, and that where they're saying there is too much regulation and that's stymieing the supply of goods and services. Do you think the debate is shifting, and someone like you as a consumer advocate, but saying there should be less regulation, are you seeing a shift at all in the debate?
So for us, it's important that we as consumers, we want more, we want newer, and we want to pay less. And policy in the last decades has failed consumers. Housing got more expensive, education got more expensive, energy got crazy expensive, and that is because there were too many interventions. And then you always have subsidies to kind of bring prices down, which then fuels the debt, increases taxes, including excise taxes, and it's like a growing spiral of interventions. And for us, it's important to represent the consumers and speak for and with the consumers, that innovation is important. We can actually live in a world where things are cheaper. We can have more energy. We can have more housing. We need to build and drill.
Yep.
That's how you get these things.
Yes.
Unfortunately, these answers are fairly simple.
Yes.
And then obviously we have people who don't like these answers. So they want to portray us as like corporate shills and are just funded by industry. we say a lot of things the industry or specific companies don't like because companies don't like competition, right? I mean, they like to be a monopolist somewhere. And we as consumers, we endorse technology neutrality. We don't want politicians and regulators to pick winners and losers in the marketplace. We want consumers to decide, do I take a legacy taxi or do I take a Bolt or Uber or whatever rideshare I have there? Do I take a hotel or do I take an Airbnb? That's for the consumers to decide and not for regulators. And this is really important for us. And we see that this debate is growing. And I think especially with the extremely high energy prices in the last couple of years, people also came a bit to rethink that it's maybe important to be pro-energy and not demonize it and not to be Malthusian. It's not that we need less people and we need to consume less, but actually we should embrace consumption. It's not a bad thing.
But don't we have to reduce carbon emissions to combat global warming and save the planet, if you like?
If you want to do this, you should endorse technology. And I think the biggest mistake in the energy policy, including my home country, Germany, was to politically prescribe how cleaner energy looks like. And in Germany, they said nuclear power is not part of this. And they shut down all the power plants, which led now to Germany just burning a lot of coal because people still need energy. So innovation probably brings us to the cleanest results. If you just compare the environmental quality or the quality of the environment and the degree of pollution, if you compare like the Soviet Union with the Western world, where were the rivers cleaner? Not in the Soviet Union.
Yes.
Because property rights, technology and innovation lead us to better outcomes.
Yep. And would one of your main points here be that the regulation that's imposed, for example, in the energy market or in the housing market or in other markets, disproportionately disadvantage those consumers who are most disadvantaged to begin with?
Yes, I fully agree. I mean, if you need to save on an average salary for 20 years to make a down payment for a small house or apartment, that is a big disadvantage. In the investment space, access to banking and actually private investments, most people who are not millionaires are being kept out because they're not sophisticated or qualified investors, which is just like discrimination of normal people.
But does it require consumers themselves to to inform themselves much more than they traditionally do, or to accept that there are more risks in just everyday life?
First of all, it's easier to inform yourself. You have online comparison platforms. There's much more information easily accessible for consumers. I mean, you can literally fire up ChatGPT and it tells you more than any government website tells you about what's safe and what's new. And it gets updated within seconds, right? So we have access to information. And sometimes I think we underestimate how many people actually look up information online, from cooking recipes to safety in a certain place or for a certain product. And I think we need to stop with that notion that consumers are a little stupid, cheap. Because we're not. And it's actually very insulting how many politicians and the legacy consumer groups treat consumers as just little stupid beings, which we're not.
Or is it that, I might just not be bothered to look at these things because life's complicated. I've got a lot of things to do, I've got a lot of things on my mind and go to the bother of it. But if the government tries to regulate in the place of that, it's just as likely to make matters worse, restrict choice, restrict innovation.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not interested in making your own choices, you can ask your partner or your friends or your parents to make choices for you. But you should not ask that everyone should be limited to that lowest base of choice.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I have it sometimes when I go with a friend to a restaurant and they say, PS order for me. I'm like, fine, I'm good at ordering. That's okay.
Yeah.
But I don't want the government to order for all of us because then it's going to be like, I don't know, potato soup every day. Not a big fan of potato soup.
Well, Fred Roeder, thanks very much for coming into to the Centre for Independent Studies, and thanks for sharing your thoughts with us. And it gives really something for us to chew on. And hope to see you again.
Great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Fred.